Hello, I'm Peter Okwache. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. The losing candidate in the DR Congo's presidential election, Martin Fayulu, says he'll challenge the result in court on Saturday morning.
We will demand them to state their results ballot by ballot for each polling station.
Anti-government protesters ramp up the pressure on Sudan's president as anger grows after Friday prayers. No longer cast out, we visit the school providing a safe haven for children with microcephaly. Also on the program, telling their own stories.
Ready for tactical insertion.
Meet the comic book artists taking African sci-fi to the mainstream.
Musicians and writers decided that they were going to create their own genre, Afrofuturism, which presents a future where black people do, in fact, exist.
And in sports, it's the start of the group phase of the African Champions League as Tunisia's Esperance begin their title defense. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. We begin in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the runner-up in the country's presidential election, Martin Fayulu, says he will file a petition at the Constitutional Court early on Saturday as he seeks to overturn the official result. The Electoral Commission declared another opposition candidate, Felix Tshisekedi, the winner. Judges will have a week to rule on Mr. Fayulu's challenge. Mr. Fayulu addressed his supporters in Kinshasa earlier.
Wake up, rise up, sons of the Congo, take courage. We will go to the Constitutional Court to file an appeal. We will demand them to state their results ballot by ballot for each polling station.
Well, let's go live now to our reporter Louise Dewast in Kinshasa. Louise, what's likely to happen now following this announcement?
So there are three likely scenarios at the Constitutional Court. The first scenario would be that the court could confirm the results from the Electoral Commission and declare Felix Tshisekedi as winner. The second scenario is that the court could decide to partially cancel some of the results, do a recount, and then declare a new result. The third scenario is that the court could also decide to cancel all the results altogether and ask the Electoral Commission to organize new elections. It's worth noting that the Constitutional Court in this country has never overturned provisional election results. So if they did, it would be on.
We do seem to have a problem with the connection there. But Mr. Fayulu has not been the only one speaking about those election results in the DR Congo today. In fact, they were discussed at the UN.
Regrettably, serious security incidents were noted in several locations. Most concerningly, in Kwilu province, violent protests have reportedly left at least 12 dead, including 2 national police lynched and 10 civilians killed by live ammunition, as well as significant public property damaged.
Let's go back to Louise Dewast there. Louise, we've just heard from the UN Security Council. Is this statement from the UN likely to douse the tension in the DRC at the moment?
Well, you know, there was always some concern from many parties in the country, but also internationally, that a contested result could spark tension, unrest in the country. We've already seen some violence in the city of Kikwit in the province of Kwilu. 12 people have reportedly been killed, and so since the announcement of these provisional results, so still a lot of tension. But all parties have, including Martin Fayulu, have called for calm as we we await now for the decision from the Constitutional Court, which we expect next week.
Luis Duast, live there from Kinshasa. Thank you very much. And we've had lots of international reaction to the provisional results. But just what will the impact be regionally? Let's speak to Leandro Komakech. He's a member of Uganda's parliament and an expert on peace and conflict. He joins me now from Kampala. Leandro, how come countries in the region are not being more vocal about the results in the DRC?
Well, I think this is the high time the region speaks very loudly. You are all aware that the Congolese problem has been one of the greatest challenges in the whole of Africa. Right from the early times when Doug Hammarskjöld lost his life, to date, when Lumumba lost his life, Congo has gone through a very, very dangerous process. And therefore, the recovery to the democratization process should be guarded very carefully. And that is why in the region, like from Uganda, we feel this is the high time the African Union be at the forefront of ensuring that the process towards this election should be guarded to the extent that no violence should be seen. We have already had situations where Uganda is hosting multiples and multiple refugees from previous conflict, and therefore further influx of refugees in Uganda will be really terrible. And
okay,
therefore,
and Leandro, I mean, you
side,
mentioned the African Union there. I mean, the SADC, the Southern African Development Community, of which the DRC is also a member, has not put out a statement yet on these results. Does this mean that bodies like the AU and SADC accept the results?
That is why we feel this is the high time. Now that the result is being challenged in the Constitutional Court, we believe at present SADC and African Union should be at the forefront of ensuring that any process that is going in Congo after this should be very guarded. Because if you hear that already 12 people have been killed, this is not good from the side of Uganda, because Congo has gone through a very, very bad process of democratization. We should not lose any life. Any transition that is to take place should be reviewed, should be carefully assessed to ensure that if there is any fault or fraudulent process in the result, it must be corrected. And therefore, we stand with the Constitutional Court. If it is true that on Saturday, they will be sitting to ensure that all is done well, then that should be the democratic road that the Democratic Republic of Congo should take. Otherwise, anything else, like violence, I don't think in Uganda it will be very good, because
Leandro, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, Leandro, but thank you very much for the regional overview on those events going on in the DR Congo. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa. Fire has destroyed many parts of Somalia's largest market overnight. Officials said a number of properties in Mogadishu trading area were damaged, but no one was hurt. The fire started in a second-hand clothes shop and quickly spread, but was under control by mid-morning. A school in South Africa has denied being racist after a photo of white and black children sitting at separate desks went viral. A board member has told state broadcaster SABC that there's definitely no racism at the institution. A teacher was, however, suspended after complaints about the picture. Parliament in Gabon is back in session after a failed coup attempt that took place on Monday. Meanwhile, the opposition is demanding more clarity on the health of the president, Ali Bongo, who is in Morocco for treatment and has yet to comment on the events earlier in the week. And contaminated water that killed over 100 camels in northern Kenya, plunging an entire village into mourning, is not thought to be suspicious. Samples from the abandoned well have been sent for tests. The animals' deaths have left residents grief-stricken because the camels are key to their livelihoods. Let's go to Sudan now, where what started as protest over the price of bread has snowballed into a countrywide revolt seen as the biggest threat to the Sudanese president's 30-year rule. Anti-government demonstrators are ramping up the pressure on Omar al-Bashir, calling on him to step down from power. And today, those protests continued after Friday prayers. BBC Africa's Mohamed Hashim has been following this story. Is it fair to say that the protests are getting more and more serious?
They are definitely more serious. I mean, we have to keep in mind that Khartoum, for example, is a city of around 6 to 8 million is the population. These protests, the largest one that we've seen was estimated at around 20,000. So you don't have the large numbers, but these are many little protests in neighborhoods and the various areas that collectively it's across the country there is a lot of movement and protest against the regime.
And just today I was on social media, I saw people holding clerics in mosques to account and saying, why don't you sanction these protests? You should be calling up people out to the streets.
Absolutely, this is very interesting. Today there was a very famous cleric called Abdul Hayy Yusuf, Sheikh Abdul Hayy Yusuf. He has a large following in Sudan, after the prayers, one in his congregation stood up, said, you'd urge us to march for the sake of Gaza or for the sake of our brethren in Syria and so forth, but yet you're seeing people being killed here in Khartoum and you haven't led us to march. So in the early days of Islam, people, the leaders of the community would step out and lead and lead their congregation. So why don't you step out and lead us? Then the congregation in the mosque broke out in the chant of Tasgud Bas, which became a catchy phrase for all these chants at the moment. It means only the downfall of the regime will make us happy. And Sheikh Abdul Hayy Yusuf was then kind of like shielded by some of his close associates and then taken through a back door in that big mosque. This is telling that the Islamists and people who go and listen to sermons by pro-regime figures are getting agitated. They're not comfortable with the amount of brutality that they're seeing on their doorsteps.
And something else that I found rather interesting is if you go to the BBC Africa website, there's a story there about the involvement of Russian troops in Sudan, in the uprising in Sudan. I've also seen it in a British newspaper today. How serious should we take these allegations that Russia is operating in Sudan?
The fact that Russia is operating in Sudan is nothing new. President Bashir made 2 visits to Russia. The first was in November 2017, and in 2018 in February he said that the Sudanese army and military will be supported by the Russians and training. So we've known about the presence of Russian contractors training the Rapid Support Force in Darfur. Most of their presence had been associated to Darfur because there is talk of mines, and then they are helping, the Russians are very involved in CAR as well. But in March 2018, a Russian sniper shot Sudanese protesters, but this was in the north of the country near a gold mining site. Now, the sightings that happened in Khartoum last week are very interesting. They were not per se within the locations of these protests. Some of them were seen close to them, but I wouldn't attach anything to it beyond it being speculation, whether they will actually help.
So we're not quite sure if they're taking part in
not just yet
quelling these protests.
Absolutely, it's only government forces at the moment.
Mohamed, I'm afraid we'll have to leave there. Mohamed Hashim, thank you very much. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwacha. Still to come, Mimi will have all the sports. FIFA President Gianni Infantino is confident that Egypt will put on a perfect Africa Cup of Nations. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top stories this hour. The losing candidate in the DR Congo's presidential election, Martin Fayulu, says he'll challenge the result in court on Saturday morning. And anti-government protesters ramp up pressure on Sudan's president as anger grows across the country following Friday prayers. Now, in the Kenyan coastal town of Kilifi, an unusually high number of children are born with a rare condition called microcephaly. It causes improper development of the brain and an abnormally small head. Many local communities cast the children out and they're often left to die. But now a school is trying to change things. Saif Abdallah reports.
This is Leah. She's 14 years old. She was born with microcephaly, a condition which has stunted her brain from growing and developing as in other children her age. She's not able to do basic tasks and needs constant assistance. When she was born, her parents were told they'd have to give her up or move from the village. But to them, they say she's their miracle child.
Sasa tufanyeje? Kangombe bibi yangu roho zetu na zikomae.
What do we do? I asked my wife and told her that we are now parents and we are not going to throw the kid away. If it means leaving our ancestral home just to take care of the kids somewhere else, so be it. But our parents insisted that even if we leave home, the kid will not grow.
Wazazi wakasema hata mkaenda kokote kule lakini huyu atakuwa.
For Leah and her parents, the Sajanad Special School in Ntwapa, Kilifi County has been a blessing. Here, Leah is able to be with other children living with microcephaly. At the school, the kids, once shunned and abandoned by communities for superstitious reasons, can play and be children.
People believe that the family who have this child microcephalus, it is like a bad omen, and also this one, it brings calamity not only the family but the whole community or the whole area.
At this government institution, they can smile. They have a special bond, and it shows their resolve to live large in a society that casts them aside if they are lucky enough to escape death. Most of these children are either brought to safety by parents who fear for their lives, and some are rescued by authorities.
There is one student which we rescued at Baringo, tied in the forest to die there. He is now here and he is now improving a lot.
Microcephaly has been linked to Zika virus, which in 2016 was declared a public health emergency of international concern, and it was singled out as a serious global threat on the same level as Ebola. Still, the medical experts aren't clear on what causes microcephaly or as to why it seems to be more prevalent in Kenya and in particular Kilifi County.
There's data showing that the rate of microcephaly in Kilifi is higher than the rest of the world and the rest of Kenya. This could be mainly related to tetanus, what we call neonatal tetanus, but they could also be related to alcoholism. They could be related to nutrition deficiency. I don't think we have had adequate studies.
While they wait for more research into microcephaly, Leah is at home for a school break, happy to be back together with her family. Saif Abdallah, BBC in Kilifi, Kenya.
Interesting stuff. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi?
Thank you very much, Peter. Today saw the start of the African Champions League group phase. Tunisia's Esperance have begun their title defense. They're currently playing away against Guinea's Horoya, who are leading. Guinea had a remarkable story as they came back from a 3-goal first-leg deficit to beat Al Nassr 6-2 in their final qualifier. Also underway is Nigeria's Lobby Stars, who are taking on South Africa's Mamelodi Sundowns. There are 2 other matches kicking off a little later. Tunisia's Club Africain are playing at home to Algiers Constantine, and Morocco's Wydad Casablanca, who face Ivory Coast ASEC Mimosa. Now, FIFA President Gianni Infantino says that Egypt, who were chosen as hosts earlier this week for this year's Africa Cup of Nations, will be able to put on a good tournament with just over 5 months to the competition. Infantino has been visiting several African countries and was speaking whilst on a tour of Benin. Cameroon were originally meant to hold a tournament, but were stripped due to delays in preparations.
Of course, there is only a very short time to organize it, but I'm sure Egypt will be able to set up a very, very beautiful African Cup of Nations. We know well the power of the Egyptians and Africans in general. They are just like Italians. We do everything at the last minute, but everything is perfect in the end.
Still staying with the Africa Cup of Nations, on Tuesday, Egypt beat South Africa as the host for this year's Africa Cup of Nations after Cameroon were stripped of the rights due to delays in preparations. And now former South Africa defender Mark Fish has had his say. He told the BBC that his country's players must now understand the importance of qualifying for these big tournaments as they prepare to take on Libya for their last qualifier in March.
Our national women's team is doing well, which is good for women's football in South Africa, but our men's team has been letting the players have been letting themselves down, most importantly. And obviously, when you let yourselves down, you're letting the national team down, you're letting the country down. And it's time now that the players take the onus of qualifying for an AFCON. So I hope that us not getting it, that they go in March, which is the last qualifier, to Libya and get the result that we need to qualify so that we have the chance to go to Egypt to play in AFCON 2019.
Now to the English Premier League fixtures taking place this weekend. Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp has given an update on his defender and Cameroon international Joel Matip. Klopp confirmed that the 27-year-old had trained with the team for the first time since his injury. Matip underwent surgery on a fractured collarbone in December. It comes ahead of their trip away to Brighton on Saturday. Matip is not expected to feature in the match, but Klopp is happy with his progress.
Joel trained yesterday first time with the team, which is already is really good. But we have to see. We have to decide it day by day how he's doing. Not 100% sure. He feels good. That's good for us, of course.
And finally, in cricket, South Africa collapsed from 229 for 3 to 262, all out on the opening day of the third and final test against Pakistan in Johannesburg. Despite a score of 90 from opener Aiden Makram, the hosts lost their last 7 wickets for just 33 runs. In reply, Pakistan closed on 17 for 2. South Africa already won the series, but a victory would take them to number 2 in the World Test rankings. And that's all the sport, Peter.
Mimi, are you a fan of sci-fi?
Not so much.
This next story might make you want. Okay. All right. Now, fed up with non-Africans telling African stories, 3 friends from Nigeria and Uganda have decided to create their own anthology showcasing artists and writers from across Africa. They hope it will bring African comics to the mainstream. They told BBC Stories why it's so important for Africans to share their own stories with the rest of the world.
Ready for tactical insertion?
Ready. An intruder.
The idea was that in the science fiction genre, there were hardly any black people. It was as though they were passing on this message that there are no black people in the future.
What is the meaning of this? Protect the general. Give your life if you must.
Musicians and writers decided that they were going to create their own genre, Afrofuturism, which presents a future where black people do, in fact, exist.
We have a story where someone from Senegal is creating a space opera. He didn't create ships to look like American jet fighters. His ships look like boats, the boats they used for fishing in Senegal.
The way we understand life is through stories. The way we get meaning in life is through our stories. The way we kind of structure ourselves in society is through the stories we tell ourselves.
There is this tendency to lump Africa into one pot as though it's a country. I think it's really important to also stress the fact that Africa is a huge and a diverse place, and so bringing diverse voices to the project will help illuminate that.
We want Nigerians, Senegalese people, Zimbabweans. I don't know what the correct word for Senegalese people is.
We try and get the really unique pieces, really outstanding artists, to just kind of pull them out of the mine, like just diamonds in the dust, right? Just pull them out and be like, they can do it if they have the chance to do it.
And that's right up my street, telling the African story, that is. That's it on Focus on Africa from me, Peter Okwoche, and the rest of the team. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.